the get-even policy down through the centuries. It's encouraging to see that our little tribal friends haven't always been able to dominate the scene. There have been intermittent periods of retaliatory actions that have been taken that have thwarted their plans. The problem is these scoundrels, these monstrosities are relentless. They don't quit. They never quit. But as we've already mentioned, 2 weeks ago, I talked about, and in the past several weeks, we've gone over some of these things in more detail. We talked, obviously, we've been talking a long time about, Egypt, what has gone on, and I'll have more to say on that in coming weeks. How numerous times they were thrown out of Egypt. But unfortunately, once again, they don't stop. It's like that cockroach. You keep swatting it, and it retreats, and it comes back. They hide in the corner, and you can't get them unless you got pointed tipped shoes. They don't stop. They never learn a lesson. They don't. They won't stop ever, unless our remedy is thorough and complete. They will never stop. Thousands of years of history show us this. We also talked about, Assyria a couple of weeks back in great detail. We broke that down. Talked about all the uprisings that they staged to overthrow the Assyrians. They claimed that, they weren't happy about having to pay taxes. Well, guess what? That's what you do, as long as they're just and fair taxes. And the taxes they were paying were just and fair, but in their estimation, they should never have to pay taxes to anyone. They weren't protesting unjust taxes. That's what needs to be understood. When they're in power, they impose unbearable tax burdens on others. And whether you like it or not, you're going to pay or suffer the consequences. But when they're in a situation where they're not, dominating, and they're told they have to pay taxes, even when they're fair taxes, when they aren't outrageously high taxes, and when the taxes are being used for legitimate purposes, for public services and whatnot, they don't want to pay. So their tax protestation is illegitimate, always has been. And as I pointed out before, don't forget, Hezekiah himself, who was a vassal to the suzerain Assyrian lord, it was his duty to pay taxes. Did he do so? No, he rebelled. And what happened? Of course, the Assyrians invaded Israel and took many thousands captive. They got what they deserved, right? Even according to the Apostle Paul, as many of you will remember. I cited Romans 13, where Paul says that we are to obey the secular rulers that God has put in power. And if you don't do so, in so many words, basically you're evil, you're of the devil. Paul denounced those who protested paying taxes. Now, do understand there are instances where tax protestation is legitimate. Again, when taxes are unfair, when they're oppressive. That's not what was going on with Hezekiah. He didn't want to pay simply because he wanted to be the big man on campus. He didn't want someone else telling him what he had to do. But by Paul's own definition, Hezekiah was of the devil, right? Paul denounced anyone who didn't pay taxes. Yet we find in the Old Testament that Hezekiah was called the greatest king Israel ever had, the greatest of men, just all this praise is heaped upon him. Another big problem with the Bible, isn't it? How can this man, on the one hand, have been praised as a great and exemplary individual, when on the other hand, if you go by what Paul said, he was cursed of the devil and, was a rebel against God in being a rebel against the sovereign king. Can't have it both ways. It's one or the other. So somebody got their stories wrong in that book. Well, as it turns out, of course, the Bible's loaded with contradictions, even far worse than that. But there's another one to add to the collection. That's one of the things, by the way, that I didn't include in my book, the Hezekiah tax rebellion thing. I think I mentioned it, but I didn't mention it in context with Paul's denunciation of tax protesters. So in the digital version, I'm going to have that included, but it's not in the current, the printed version. But that's fine. I'm sure After the digital version is up, I'm going to find more stuff. It's just how it goes. That's why writing books is so frustrating, because you're always, and that's why you see a lot of, second edition, third edition, fourth edition, because authors always find more and more stuff. It's like, oh no, I wish I got this in there. You try to be thorough and exhaustive, but it's really not possible. Your whole lifetime, you're constantly finding new things. You're never going to have something so complete that you didn't leave anything out. You don't want to leave anything out, but you can't help but doing it. It's just, human frailties get in there. Anyway, so we covered Egypt in this set of notes, and indeed over the past, several months, and we'll be covering Egypt some more, but you already get the idea. You've seen that Egypt has stood up and given the tribe their just desert. Now, today, many would have us believe that in these instances, like when Egypt, threw them out, when that's even acknowledged, of course, the biblical version is they weren't thrown out. They fought for their freedom so they could escape oppression. That's not at all what happened. They were the oppressors that got thrown out. But in any case, on the occasion when it's admitted they were thrown out of this, that, or the other country, the explanation has always been, and ever still is, that, well, they just don't like us. That's why we've been mistreated and persecuted, They don't like us because of our religion or how we look or whatever. No, that's not the reason. That's never been the reason. And as we go through this discussion, we're going to look into this more and more and see that there have been very, very legitimate, justifiable reasons for them having been thrown out of so many countries because of the havoc that they have wreaked. The same type of havoc, let me remind you, that we're suffering right now in this country and many other countries abroad where they exert their toxic influence. We're seeing hemorrhaging of our jobs overseas. We're seeing the devaluation of our dollar. Our economy is going belly up, in spite of the fact that many Americans are in denial of that and playing make-believe and thinking that, oh, just wait, time will turn this around. No. There has been a consistent spiraling downward in this economy for decades on end, all by design. It's undeniable. It's thoroughly documented. And if you climb the ladder high enough, you don't have to climb the ladder that high at all, as it turns out. But, as you look up the top rungs of that ladder, you will see that the people that have been manipulating us into this position, it's them. It's always been them. All through the centuries, this is all they have ever done. And this is why they've been thrown out of so many countries so many times. There's been several reasons, but one of the biggest ones, one of the most common reasons, has simply been their economic saboteur activity. Destroying, though they do a lot of other things too. And those other reasons factored in there, blood libel and demoralization of society, infiltrating, the media, public avenues of information, and corrupting them so that the public is malinformed, on and on and on. All of that and more, corrupting the political system with their lobby groups and whatnot, or in past ages, becoming advisors to the king and misleading the king and manipulating him or threatening him, bribing him, whatever. But once again, the biggest one of all has been their sabotage of economies. People losing their jobs, losing their ability to earn a livable wage, destroying their livelihoods, and therefore rotting the nation from within. People think that to take a country over, you've got to amass a big enough army, and as long as you have a strong military, nobody can attack you. That's what Americans think, right? We have the strongest military in the world. Nobody could ever, That's true. We do have the strongest military, and militarily, there really is no nation in the world that could, take us over from without. But that's not the only way to take a nation down. That's not the only way to take control of a country. It's very easy to take control of a mighty nation that has a very strong military when you infiltrate it from within. That's what they've always done, and that's what they're doing now. Although, as I've pointed out before, it's not so much that we have been infiltrated. This